The wind howled through the iron hills, carrying with it the cold breath of a dying storm. The pine trees groaned under the weight of snow, their shadows trembling in the fading light. Elias Crow tightened his coat and adjusted the lantern in his hand, its flame flickering against the vast emptiness around him. His loyal border collie Ranger trotted ahead on the muddy trail, ears perked and nose close to the ground. It had been a quiet winter so far, the kind of silence that sinks into your bones, until that night. Ranger stopped suddenly and barked, low and uneasy. Elias frowned. Out here, miles from Silver Creek, there weren't supposed to be any visitors. He followed Ranger's bark around a bend in the trail, where the dim glow of lightning lit the ground just long enough for him to see a body lying in the mud. Elias dropped to one knee. It was a woman, her dress torn, covered in blood and dirt. Her hair clung to her pale face, lips cracked and colorless. For a second he thought she was gone. Then he saw it, a faint movement in her chest, a breath so shallow it could barely be seen. "Easy now," he muttered, checking her pulse. "You're still here." Ranger whined softly, pressing his muzzle against the woman's hand. Elias lifted her carefully. She felt weightless, like someone who hadn't eaten or slept for days. As he stood, a folded paper slipped from her sleeve and drifted down the slope. Elias caught it before the wind carried it away, a letter with a wax seal. When he wiped off the mud, his heart froze. It bore the stamp of the Territorial Marriage Bureau, and his own name written beneath it. Elias Crow. Bride, Clara Monroe. The woman in his arms was the stranger he had been promised months ago, the bride who never came. For weeks, he told himself she had changed her mind, that no woman in her right mind would travel across the desert to marry a quiet ex-soldier living in the mountains. But now she was here, broken, freezing and barely alive. He looked toward the black horizon where thunder rumbled. "Hold on, Clara," he whispered. "You made it this far. I won't let it end here." The cabin stood on a rise above the valley, built with his own hands after the war. Inside, a small fire cast a soft glow across the room. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a shelf lined with old books and ammunition. It was a place meant for one man and a dog, not for love or company. Elias laid Clara on the bed, brushed the wet hair from her face, and felt for her pulse again. Still there, faint but steady. Ranger settled near the bedside, watching her as if guarding a fragile secret. Elias worked quietly, cleaning her cuts with warm water and wrapping her bruised hands. He had learned enough field medicine in the army to keep someone alive through a long night. As he worked, the memory of her letters drifted through his mind. The neat handwriting, the cautious words, the loneliness that matched his own. "I didn't think you'd come," he murmured. "Guess I was wrong." Outside, the wind beat against the shutters. Inside, he fed the fire and kept watch, giving her small sips of water whenever she stirred. Hours passed before she whispered her first words, soft, broken sounds lost between dreams and fever. When morning light crept through the cracks in the shutters, Clara Monroe opened her eyes. Confusion clouded her gray gaze. Where am I?" "You're safe," Elias said, sitting beside her. "You're in my cabin near Silver Creek. I found you last night." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. He held a cup of water to her mouth. She drank, then coughed softly. "The coach," she whispered. "There were men, they robbed us. They killed some. I ran. I thought I'd die out there." Elias clenched his jaw. "You're lucky you didn't." Her eyes moved toward the table, where the folded marriage letter still rested. Her breathing quickened. "You're Elias Crow," she said, voice barely audible. "You're the man I was coming to marry." Elias nodded slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. The truth hung heavy between them, tangled with fate and fear. Then Ranger's sudden growl shattered the silence. His body stiffened, ears forward, eyes fixed on the door. Elias rose instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay down," he whispered. Through the window he saw shadows moving among the trees, 3, maybe 4 figures on horseback. One wore a scarlet coat, the kind no decent man would wear in these parts. Clara's face drained of color. They said they'd come back for me, she whispered. They think I still have it. Have what? She swallowed hard. Documents, papers from a woman who died on the coach. She told me to take them to the federal marshal in Redstone. Said they could expose someone powerful. But I lost them, they fell when I ran. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. And now they think you still have them. She nodded, tears forming. If they find me, they'll kill me. Not while I'm breathing. The first knock came hard, a man's voice calling through the storm. Hey there, cabin. We're looking for a lady, lost her way last night. Might be hurt. We'll pay good for information. Elias didn't move. No one here but me, he called back. The voice turned cold. We know she's in there, Crow. We found the blood trail. Send her out and we'll make it quick. Ranger growled again, low and deep. Elias crouched beside the bed, handing Clara his revolver. You know how to use this? She nodded weakly. My father taught me. Good. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Ranger, you shoot. Don't hesitate. He slipped out the back door into the gray dawn, the storm masking his movements. Ranger followed, silent as a shadow. The bandits focused on the front, unaware the hunter had already circled behind them. The leader, the man in the red coat, aimed his rifle at the window. Last chance, he shouted. He never finished the sentence. Elias's bullet struck first, clean and final. The second outlaw turned, too late. A sharp blow from Elias's rifle but dropped him to the ground. The third tried to run, but Ranger lunged, knocking him flat before Elias disarmed him. When the echo of gunfire faded, only one man was still alive, young, terrified, barely more than a boy. Elias dragged him inside. What's your name? Silas. Silas Trent, the boy stammered. Please, I didn't want to. Elias cut him off. Who sent you? Baron Harlan, Silas said. He owns half the land around Silver Creek. The woman on that stagecoach had proof he's been stealing territory from settlers. He wants it back, or her dead. Clara listened, her face pale but steady. He'll keep coming, she said softly, until he gets what he wants. Elias reloaded his rifle, eyes hard. Then we don't wait for him. He looked toward the window where sunlight finally broke through the clouds. The world outside was still and white, but he could feel the storm returning, not in the sky but on the horizon of their lives. He turned to Clara. You said the marshal's in Redstone? Yes. Then that's where we're going. Clara met his eyes, frightened but resolute. And for the first time in years, Elias Crow felt something new stirring inside him. Purpose. He packed his rifle, the letter, and enough supplies for the road ahead. Ranger barked once, ready. As the three of them stepped out into the pale morning light, the soldier, the stranger, and the boy who had chosen the wrong side, the mountains echoed their silent promise. Whatever waited beyond the Iron Hills, they would face it together. The trail east from the Iron Hills was narrow and cruel, nothing but dust, frozen wind, and the echo of hooves over stone. Elias Crow led the way, rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Behind him, Clara Monroe rode a borrowed mare, her face pale beneath her hat, but her posture steady. Silas Trent, the captured outlaw, followed on foot, wrists loosely tied to the saddle horn of Elias's horse. The boy had begged to come along rather than be left behind for the coyotes. Elias had agreed, not out of mercy, but because he needed to know what Baron Harlan might try next. You ever been to Redstone? Elias asked over his shoulder. Silas shook his head. No, sir. Harlan keeps his kind in the big towns. Men like me, we don't get invited to the table. Elias glanced at him. Then I guess this'll be your first honest trip. Silas looked down, ashamed. Maybe my last too. Ranger trotted between them, alert as always, nose twitching for danger. They rode for hours through rough canyons and high passes. The storm clouds that had haunted them for days finally broke, spilling thin snow that glittered like dust in the dawn. At night they made camp beneath a rocky overhang. Elias built a small fire, careful not to let the smoke rise too high. Clara sat beside the flames, wrapped in his coat, staring into the dark. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked quietly. "What?" "Running from ghosts. Fighting for people who don't even know your name." Elias poked at the fire, his face lit in amber. "No. But it's better than pretending you don't care." Clara smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who's been running a long time." He met her eyes. "I have." There was a silence between them, deep and unspoken. The kind that didn't need words, just understanding. By the third day the land began to change. The jagged hills softened into rolling plains and the air grew warmer. They were nearing the old Silver Canyon route, once used by miners and smugglers. Elias knew it too well. It was the same trail he'd used when he first left the army, trying to outrun the nightmares that followed him home. But this time he wasn't running. They stopped near a frozen stream to rest. Silas gathered firewood while Clara refilled their canteens. Elias crouched near Ranger, who was staring into the treeline, hackles raised. "What is it, boy?" Before he could answer his own question, a gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and close. Clara dropped to her knees beside the stream, water spilling from the canteen. "Down?" Elias barked, shoving her behind a fallen log. More shots echoed, splintering bark inches from his head. 3 riders emerged from the ridge, Harlan's men, rifles drawn. Silas froze, panic flashing across his face. "They found us." Elias fired back, dropping the first rider cleanly. The second ducked behind a boulder, returning fire. Ranger sprinted toward the third horseman, snarling and biting at his boot until the man toppled into the dirt. Clara gripped her revolver with trembling hands. "Elias." "I see him," Elias called, firing again. His bullet hit stone, sparking against the rock. The fight was short but vicious. When the smoke cleared, 2 men were dead and the third, wounded, crawled backward, bleeding into the snow. Elias stood over him, rifle raised. "Where's Harlan?" The man spat blood, laughing weakly. "Closer than you think. He's got half the territory looking for you. You'll never make it to Redstone alive." Elias didn't reply. He lowered his weapon slowly. "Maybe not. But I only need to make it once." He turned away as the outlaw collapsed, the sound of his laughter fading into the wind. That night, they camped beside a river where the stars burned clear and sharp. Silas, exhausted, fell asleep first. Ranger lay nearby, ears twitching in the quiet. Clara and Elias sat close by the fire, the orange glow painting her face in soft light. "You saved me," she said softly. "More than once. I never asked you to." "You didn't have to." She studied him for a long moment. "You could have stayed hidden. You could have let me die that night." He smiled faintly. "I've done enough letting things die, Miss Monroe. Didn't want to add you to the list." Her lips parted, but no words came. The night stretched around them, heavy with things they both wanted to say but couldn't. Finally she whispered, "When this is over, what then?" Elias stared into the fire. "If we live long enough to find out, I'll tell you." By the time they reached the outskirts of Redstone City, the mountains were only a blue ghost behind them. The town buzzed with miners, wagons, and the noise of industry. Smoke curled from chimneys, and steam hissed from the ironworks that gave the city its name. They met Samuel Price, an old war friend of Elias's, who now ran a supply post near the freight yard. Samuel's beard was gray, but his handshake was as firm as ever. "Elias Crow," he said with a grin. "I thought the buzzards had finished you off years ago." "Not yet," Elias replied. "We need help, Sam. Quiet help." When Elias explained their situation, Samuel's smile faded. "You're tangling with Harlan? Hell, he owns half the law in this territory. You'll need more than luck." "Got anything better?" Samuel thought for a moment. "Maybe. There's a newspaper office, the Redstone Gazette. Editor's name's Maggie Lowe. Tough as boot leather and twice as sharp. If you can get her the evidence, she'll make the whole world know what Harlan's done. Clara nodded. Then that's where we go. The next morning they entered the Gazette office, a narrow building filled with ink, paper, and the steady rhythm of printing presses. Maggie Lowe looked up from her desk, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. You brought a dog, a convict, and a half-dead bride into my office, she said. This ought to be good. Elias laid the documents on her desk, stolen ledgers, forged land titles, and letters bearing Harlan's signature. Maggie's eyebrows rose as she skimmed them. Lord above, she muttered. This is enough to hang him twice. She looked up. You realize if I print this, Harlan will come for all of us. Clara met her gaze. He already has. Maggie smiled, thin but fierce. Then let's make it worth his trouble. They didn't have to wait long. By sundown, the presses thundered to life, spitting out front-page headlines that screamed across town. Baron Harlan exposed, land fraud and murder in Silver Creek. When Elias stepped outside to load supplies, he saw them, riders approaching fast from the west, dust rising behind them like smoke. Harlan's men, he shouted. Gunfire erupted. Windows shattered. Maggie ducked behind the printing press, still yelling for her crew to keep it running. Ranger lunged at a man who tried to force the door, knocking him down before Elias's bullet finished the job. Silas, shaking but determined, grabbed a fallen rifle and fired from the window, covering Elias and Clara. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the air was thick with smoke and ink. The presses kept rolling. Maggie looked up, wiping soot from her cheek. It's printed. Every copy in the city'll know by morning. Outside, the church bells began to ring. People poured into the streets, reading the headlines in disbelief. A crowd gathered outside the courthouse just as U.S. Marshals rode in. Within hours, Baron Harlan and his men were arrested, their power finally broken by truth and ink. When dawn came, the city was quiet again. The snow on the rooftops glowed gold beneath the rising sun. Clara stood with Elias on the courthouse steps, her hand resting on his arm. It's over, she whispered. Elias nodded. For now. She smiled softly. You once told me you'd stopped believing in new beginnings. He looked at her, eyes tired but gentle. Maybe I was wrong. Ranger barked, tail wagging as if agreeing. Clara took a step closer. What happens now, Elias Crow? He reached for her hand. Now we live together. And as the first train whistled across the plains, carrying the news of freedom through the Iron Hills, Elias, Clara, and Ranger walked down the street, not as fugitives but as survivors. Two lost souls who had found each other in the storm, and built a new dawn out of the ashes of the past.